House of the Dragon Episode 8 Ending Explained. Well, what an episode that was. With us bidding farewell to King Viserys in the most poetic of ways, he saw his family all together as he'd always wished for, before his last words seem as though they're set to be the very thing that's going to go on to cause them to be ripped apart, and for the war that was looming to now erupt. So with that, I thought I'd recap, break down, and explain all that there was to take away from the ending of Episode 8. So let's get into it. Here is House of the Dragon Episode 8, Ending Explained. Just to let you know, this video will contain spoilers. With the episode being titled Lord of the Tides, it was very much centered around that for the first half of the episode. It's what led Rhaenys to King's Landing, along with Daemon Velaryon, and also Rhaenyra and Daemon with their children. With Corlys Velaryon in a critical state, the conversation we saw taking place in episode 7 of the show became ever more important, as the Driftwood throne potentially would be laid there to be claimed, and the decision was now left to the Vipers ruling in the king's name, meaning the Hightowers, due to the fact that his condition had deteriorated so much so that he was near on bedbound and struggled with his mobility. We saw that the king was basically kept on what's called milk of the poppy, which essentially renders an individual that takes it almost to the point of unconsciousness, whilst also relieving pain significantly. It's made by crushing up poppy flowers and contains a white colouring, which is where the name derives from. One of the main things that we saw occurring was Daemon pleading to Otto Hightower as to why he deserved to inherit Driftmark from his brother, and we also saw Rhaenyra doing the same. You can understand why Daemon wants to inherit Driftmark, and it's so that the true bloodline of Old Valyria will reign, and that House Velaryon will continue onwards. The legitimacy of Lucerys means that despite the fact that in the history books it will read as a Velaryon ruler, the bloodline will weaken due to half of his genetics being made up of House Strong. Otto and Alicent were essentially set on naming Daemon as the person to inherit the land, as it would weaken the positioning of Rhaenyra. But as Rhaenyra was making her speech, we saw that King Viserys entered in what could arguably be one of the most powerful scenes in the entirety of the show. Unaided, struggling, and walking towards the Iron Throne with all of the life that he had left within him. Whilst this was happening, we saw a sheepish Sir Otto get off of the throne as if to know that it wasn't his seat, and the room was just in pure shock to see Viserys there. There were some beautiful scenes that mirrored the start of the season prior to this scene, such as when the Maesters were tending to Viserys when he had one small patch in episode 1, and now we were seeing the same thing occurring, but his whole body was almost destroying itself. And during this scene we had a beautiful moment when Daemon tended to his older brother, when he dropped his crown, and he then assisted him to the Iron Throne. All Viserys has wanted was for his family to be together and to keep the peace, and with Daemon helping him, it was a stark contrast to the scene that we saw in episode 1 of the show, when Daemon wanted the Iron Throne, was sat on it, and was eventually banished. With Lucerys being named as the inheritor to Driftmark, we saw that Daemon was displeased and insulted Rhaenyra's children, along with the way that the king ruled his kingdom. And in turn, Daemon ended up killing him in the most brutal and, well, Daemon of ways. You could sense that it wasn't what the Hightowers wanted, but it was a moment that really cemented the king's view one final time and the positioning that he took on his family. Following this, an important scene that followed was of Rhaenys standing there looking over Daemon's body, where she was told that it doesn't bring good fortune to look over the dead. She went on to say that it essentially didn't matter, as she'd lost her daughter, she believed that she had lost her son, and her husband Corlys Velaryon was now in a critical condition. With the episode 9 trailer looking as though she's locked in a room, death may soon be close to finding her. The penultimate scene that we witnessed was a 15-minute dinner between both sides of the families. We saw the king drop his mask down, and we saw that he was a shell of who he was. He was missing an eye and had a hole in the side of his face. Something I thought was quite poignant in this scene was how his damaged side was closest to Allicent, and it was the side of the family that had essentially been the death of him, and the side that was facing Rhaenyra was the only part that was as close of a resemblance to who he was before, his old life with Aemma and the child I believe he cared for the most. Viserys spoke of how he wanted and needed the family to be together as one for the House of the Dragon to stand strong, and this was where we genuinely saw all arms of the family reconcile, at least Rhaenyra and Alicent, with Alicent essentially stating that she viewed Rhaenyra as heir, showing a drastic change in opinions and mindsets between the former best friends. We had Jacaerys dancing with Helaena, which I thought, despite it being Jacaerys' way of digging at Aegon, it was a visual representation of that brief moment when all was okay between the families and both sides were as one, whilst also being symbolic of the Dance of the Dragons which is to come. There was a beautiful moment where we saw King Viserys looking around at the room, and it was full of happiness, which was everything that he wanted in his life, to keep the 70-year peace that was inherited, and to also keep his family together. And this was the last that he saw of his family. It's exactly what he'd always wanted, so it was extremely meaningful, poignant to the character's arc, and powerful to witness. Once Viserys had left the room, that was where we did see some of the conflict start to brew. Aemond had a pig brought in, which led Lucerys to chuckle, most likely down to the fact that it was a nod to what we saw a couple of episodes back, where we saw them mock Aemond with the pig, as he wasn't able to have his own dragon due to the egg not hatching. And then the two pairs of sons then got into a brawl, which was stopped once Daemon stepped in and ultimately caused Aemond to step back, as he knows of the unpredictable nature of Daemon and is no match for him right now. With the way that the camera was positioned, it was ultimately alluding to the inevitable face-off that's on the horizon and is going to be occurring. The final scene that we saw was of Allicent tending to Viserys in his chamber, and Viserys mistakenly thought that it was Rhaenyra, and they were continuing the conversation from earlier on about Aegon's prophecy and if he believed it to be true. Alicent essentially got the wrong end of the stick and believed that their son Aegon was the prince that was promised that he was discussing, and would be the leader who would essentially unite the realm about the war against the common enemy. However, this wasn't what he meant. He was directing the conversation toward Rhaenyra, and when he said the line about her being the one, he meant Rhaenyra being queen. So it most certainly seems as though an entire war is going to break out based on the misunderstanding of what King Viserys was saying whilst lying on his deathbed. We also got a short section of Mysaria making an appearance for the first time in a while, and it appears as though she has eyes and ears inside of King's Landing. She does eventually go on to be the mistress of whisperers for Rhaenyra, so she's likely aware of the events that occurred that evening in the palace. One thing that I took away from this episode was how much Alicent really did care for King Viserys, right up until the end. As Rhaenyra mentioned, we saw her being kind, tending to him, and being there by his bedside, showing that despite being a pawn in the game, I think there was genuine care behind them being together. As we witnessed King Viserys die in the final scene, he uttered the line, "My love," when it cut to black, so one would only assume that he saw his true love, Queen Aemma, again as he parted to the other side. It was beautiful. I have to give this episode to Paddy Considine because he rounded off the perfect depiction of a character, and I think the most wholesome and complete character that we've seen, especially after only having one season with them. The love he had for his family and the kingdom was at his core, and he died believing that everything would be okay, and maybe that's why he felt ready to let go. But it certainly seems as though everything that was mended in this episode is going to be undone and be far worse with the death of the king, and Aegon looking as though he's going to be forced to ascend the Iron Throne despite not even wanting it that much. I'm looking forward to seeing how the final 2 episodes are going to go, and if a traditional episode 9 of Game of Thrones is going to run true with this series too. We'll just have to wait and see. So, there you have it. House of the Dragon episode 8, Ending Explained. If you want to see more videos on House of the Dragon, such as endings explained, theories and predictions, and character breakdowns, then click on the I button, or alternatively you can head over to my channel where you'll find them all. If you'd like to give me a show or movie that you'd like me to review, then head over to my Twitter, @brainpilot_, and tweet me what show or movie you'd like me to review next. And finally, if you'd like to see what I rate the latest movies that don't quite make the cut to getting a dedicated video, then head over to my Letterboxd profile. It's where I rate the latest releases in real time. Are you looking forward to episode 9? Leave a comment down below, and don't forget to subscribe. I'll see you next time.